Hi, friends and clients. My name is Tristan Scheffler here with my colleague Zach. I want to give you guys an update on the Big Beautiful Bill Act that recently passed. So, with that, I'll pass it off to Zach for some more details.
All right, thank you. It's like Tristan said, my name's Zach Potter, and I'm one of the newer advisors here at ARQ Wealth. Well, I've had the opportunity to meet several of you at some of our client events. Thought this would be a good way to introduce myself further. Like Tristan said, we're going to be sharing a bit of information regarding the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was signed into law on July 4th. Now, this bill is the Trump administration's key piece of legislation, and it does impact several areas, including the debt ceiling, border security, social programs, taxes, and more. We're going to focus on the tax impact and touch on some of the social programs affected. So with that, we'll kind of dive into some quick hits here. So you'll see for tax year 2025, the standard deduction is increasing. It's going from 15,000 to 15,750 for single filers, 30,000 to 31,500 for married joint filers, and 22,500 to 23,625 for head of household filers. And again, this is for tax year 2025. Next, we'll see the marginal tax brackets. So the rates that were established with the Tax Cuts and Job Act were set to sunset at the end of this year, but now they will remain in place going forward and will continue to adjust for inflation. Another big talking point with the original Tax Cuts and Jobs Act situation was the state and local tax deduction. It was capped at $10,000, but for 2025, it has been increased to $40,000 with a 1% increase through 2029. This provision will revert back to the $10,000 amount in 2030. And it does have a phase out of at 500,000 modified adjusted gross income. However, do note, regardless of how high the income goes, it cannot fall below that $10,000 amount. This bill also introduced a new charitable deduction. So now non-itemizers, or those that take the standard deduction, can deduct $1,000 for single filers or $2,000 for married filing joint filers for charitable deductions. The estate and gift tax exemption was also set to sunset at the end of this year. However, it has been extended and made permanent. So for 2025, that amount for single filers is 13.99 million and going up to 15 million in 2026. Note that both those amounts are doubled for married filers. The child tax credit is another one that was going to be sunsetting. It's currently at 2,000. It was going to sunset back to an original amount of 1,000. However, with the passing of this bill, it actually increased to 2,200 per child, with 1,700 of that being refundable. There is a phase out at 200,000 of modified adjusted gross income. Then lastly, the child independent care tax credit. It raised the percentage of expenses that qualify from 35% to 50%. The phase out does remain low, but the expenses cannot be reduced below 20%. And this does begin after December 31st, 2025. Next, we'll move on to some of the social programs. So first up is Medicaid, where work requirements were introduced. So those seeking eligibility for Medicaid that are able to work will have to work a minimum of 80 hours per month. This bill increased the frequency of eligibility checks from annually to semi-annually. It's also allowing for some increased cost sharing through copays. And it's an estimated federal funding reduction of $344 billion between 2025 and 2034. SNAP benefits expanded the working requirements, increased the ages, and while none of the SNAP benefits are expected to be reduced, it is leading to a federal funding reduction of about $186 billion. Next, we'll take a look at 529 accounts, where K through 12 expansion increased annual tax-free withdrawals from 10,000 to 20,000. It also expanded a wider range of K through 12 costs. Funds in 529 accounts can now also be used for continuing educations, workforce training programs, professional credentials or designations, And also the rollovers from 529 accounts to ABLE accounts have been made permanent. Lastly, here on education is student loans. The repayment plans were cut down to two options, a standard fixed and a repayment assistant plan, which will calculate payments, the payment amount of 1 to 10% of adjusted gross income. This bill does now issue or establish new borrowing caps for different types of degrees. We've seen an elimination of economic hardship with deferments and deferments in general. And then there has been a resumption of aggressive collection tactics, including wage garnishments, withholding tax refunds, and so on. With that, I'll turn it over to Tristan to talk a little bit more about some of the provisions in this bill.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And here we have a few of the big items that Trump really ran on when he was trying to get back into office this last year. And interestingly enough, these are all temporary deductions that are going to go for the next 4 years, starting January 1st of this year, 2025, through the end of 2028. First one here is no tax on tips. So this is going to be a deduction, a federal deduction of up to $25,000 of qualified tip income. Important to note that $25,000 is regardless of if you're a single filer or married filing jointly. And there is going to be a phase out starting at $150,000. And this is just, as I mentioned, a federal deduction. So Social Security, Medicare, and state taxes will all still apply, and employers are going to have to withhold accordingly. No tax on overtime. That is a pretty similar deduction as no tax on tips. However, that deduction is going to be $12,500 for single filers, and that one will double up to $25,000 if you are married filing jointly. Phase out is the same here, $150,000 for single individuals, goes up to $300,000 for those married filing jointly, and Social Security, Medicare, and state taxes will all still apply to overtime pay as well. Social Security tax, so the original idea, kind of like with tips and overtime, was no taxes in general, and that got replaced with a new senior deduction of $6,000 for single filers, goes up to $12,000 for those married filing jointly. And that does have a relatively low phase out, starting at $75,000 for single individuals. However, it's interesting to note currently, at least before this bill, about 2/3 of adults did not pay any taxes on Social Security because their income was so low they were in the 0% bracket. With this update, it's expected that about 88% of Social Security recipients will not pay any taxes. Again, the deduction is temporary, so that'll only go for the next few years and revert back in 2029. Last one here is the auto loan interest deduction. A few key things to keep in mind here. One, it's going to apply to new vehicles, and two, they need to have a final assembly in the United States. So before you go out buying a new car and expecting this deduction, do your research, make sure it meets both of those standards. This will actually allow you to deduct up to $10,000 of auto loan interest. And that's actually qualified auto loan interest. Not all loans will apply to this. For example, family loans will not. So it's going to have to be one of your typical auto loans to qualify. And kind of one of the main reasons this was included is the administration expected vehicle prices to pick up due to tariffs. So the idea was to help offset some of those costs. Next, just want to touch on FSAs and HSAs. So FSAs did have an update to their contribution limits. Actually went up 50% from 5,000 to 7,500. And that was the first increase since 1986. So that's probably going to stay put for quite a while. Wouldn't expect any increases anytime soon. And there were no changes to the eligibility, expenses, or use it or lose it provisions. HSAs, a little different updates here. They originally had that the contribution limits would double if your income was below a certain amount. However, that did not pass it through the final version of the bill. But essentially, a few more plans now qualify as high deductible health plans, and telehealth services are going to be covered before the deductible is met, which was a temporary provision and now is made permanent. Then last thing I want to touch on for you guys today is the Trump account for minors. This is kind of a hot topic, and it's going to start with a $1,000 seed investment from the government if you have a child born between 2025 and 2028. These are interesting. They are very similar to IRAs. The earnings are going to grow tax deferred, and the differences really come on the distribution side. If it is a qualified distribution, it's actually going to be eligible for long-term capital gains versus ordinary income. Only a few things are going to qualify as qualified withdrawals, and that's going to be higher education expenses, first-time home purchases, or small business cost, essentially. Now, if you have a child born before 2025 or after 2028, they will still be eligible for these accounts as long as they're under 18. However, only those born between 25 and 28 will be eligible for that initial seed investment from the government. Outside of the initial government-funded investment, parents can contribute up to $5,000 per year, and employers can actually contribute up to $2,500 without it being included in the parent's gross income. And contributions are not tax deductible like they would be with most tax advantage accounts, so no upfront benefit, but you still have the tax deferral on growth and possible long-term gains benefit on withdrawals. Outside of those three qualified withdrawal reasons, essentially everything else will be taxable as ordinary income with the possibility of an early withdrawal penalty of 10%. And as I mentioned, child needs to be under 18 to be eligible. They need to be a US citizen with a social security number, and the parent is going to have to make an election. Details on that election should be coming shortly with a little bit more clarification. But that's mostly all we have for you guys today, and we'll try to keep you updated on any other big changes created through legislation or bills. But hope you guys enjoyed, and hopefully we'll keep you updated.